Welcome to Creatively Christian, a podcast by Theology Media, where we inspire, inform, educate, and empower creative Christians of all types. I'm one of your hosts, Brannon Hollingsworth. In today's episode, I get to talk with Thor Ramsey, who defends Christian comedy and shares some excellent tips for screenwriters.
Before we get into the episode today, I just wanted to tell you about a special event that's coming up. If you're watching or listening to this before June 14th, 2021, then you still have time to sign up for our free summit, Email Marketing for Christian Fiction Authors. The summit features 12 expert authors and writers from a variety of experiences, all offering you their best tips on growing and using an email list. You can go to theophanymedia.com/summit to get more information. And if it's past that date, that's okay. Go to that link anyway to see our latest events and to learn how to purchase the summit recordings. Okay, now back to the interview.
Hello, everyone. Again, this is Brannon Hollingsworth coming back to you with the Creatively Christian podcast from Theology Media. And today I'm fanboying just a little bit because I'm getting the opportunity to interview one of my favorite Christian comics on the planet, Mr. Thor Ramsey. Hello, Thor. How are you?
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I am so stoked. I am so excited. Before we start, everybody, I showed Thor a little Bananas DVD that I watch all the time with him and Bone Hampton, which I think is one of the funniest things ever. So thank you so much for giving us some of your time, Thor, to come on today and talk a little bit about church people. Tell us a little bit right off the top. We'll cover this again before we're done, but where can people find out a little bit more about church people so they can pull it up?
If they go to churchpeoplefilm.com, that's really the place to find out what's happening. The theatrical release is already passed, but there's still other ways to see it. So churchpeoplefilm.com, and the best way is just, put your email on them. They'll give you updates as to how things, they're rolling out different ways of seeing it, and as they do all films, and then eventually it'll make its way to digital media, but there's ways of seeing it now. So
awesome.
Go right there.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, we were talking with Christopher yesterday. He's the director, and he was saying that there's so many moving parts with this film release thing. But let me tell everyone a little bit about who you are, Thor. So I'm going to read your bio. So Thor Ramsey wrote Church People, in which he stars as Guy, the mega church youth pastor. Thor has been a working stand-up comedian since 1987. He began his career as a club comic, where he worked in most of the major comedy clubs around the country, such as the Improvs and Funny Bone comedy club chains. In 2004, Thor became the host of Bananas comedy series, which was purchased by Sony Television and could be seen in over 90 million homes in its heyday, mostly by 12-year-olds and by Brannon. So along with Bananas, which ran for 3 seasons, Thor was featured in 3 of the best-selling Christian comedy DVDs of all time, Thou Shalt Laugh, from the same producer as the Blue Collar Comedy Hour. Thor also wrote and produced his own comedy series for 1 season, Comedy at Large with Thor Ramsey, which aired on the now-defunct iLife TV channel. Thor has also produced and directed 5 stand-up comedy specials, including Brimstones and Punchlines, Narrow Road Comic, Square, and Thor Ramsey's New Comedy Revolution 1 and 2. Thor is a member of the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists and is the author of 3 books. He has a wife, 2 daughters, and a son. Welcome, my brother. I am so excited. So tell us, Thor, a little bit about, I think you're probably the first Christian comedian we've had on the Creatively Christian podcast. So
okay,
tell us a little bit about being a believer and having a desire to be a comedian. What kind of led you to combine those 2 things?
Well, I thought about being a comedian even before I was a Christian. I was just always drawn. I remember when I was a little kid, I must have been like 5 or 6 years old. I used to get up late at night and sneak downstairs. My dad would be watching The Tonight Show. And, my dad would just let me crawl up in his lap, and then I'd be watching The Tonight Show with I think some of it was just to hang out with my dad at night, but
sure.
But I remember when the comedians came on, I didn't really understand what they were, but I remember all throughout my childhood, the comedians would come on the Tonight Show, and there was just this, you know, it's like some people fall in love with the theater. Well, I fell in love with the whole concept of stand-up. So there's a person talking and people laughing at them. It's, you know, but they're making people laugh was the whole thing. And so I was always kind of the class clown and kind of a combination class clown teacher's pet. And you get that by making the teachers laugh. And then if you can make the teachers laugh, then you're class clown, you know, teacher's pet type of thing. So, so I was just always attracted to stand up. And then throughout your life, people tell you should be, you should be a stand up. And then I had a friend, I think it was my junior year of high school. A friend of mine came to me and said, I had a dream last night. You were on the Tonight Show. And she goes, you had a good set. And so about a decade later, I found myself working as an operations supervisor at a trucking company, and I hated the job. So I figured, if you're not going to follow your own dreams, you might as well follow somebody else's. So I went ahead and found my way to I found an ad for a local comedy competition and entered it and won the first round, and just, from there started working every week. And that was 1987 again. And then
wow,
within a year, I was working 42 weeks a year on the road.
That is crazy. That's just amazing. It's like I just followed my calling right into it, just took that first leap.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, your friend who said that your set was great on the Tonight Show, did you ask her to write any of that stuff down? That good set that you had in her dreams?
No, it was actually someone I dated. And so I don't think it ended well.
So that is some powerful advice, though. If you're a young, listener out there or a young watcher, and you're thinking about getting into this kind of creative comedy space, follow what God's leading you to do, right?
Well, I will say this in terms of the creative, you have to practice your craft to get good at it. I mean, I think it was Jerry Seinfeld said this: you got to be bad at comedy before you can be good at it.
Right.
Because there's, it's like, it's different to make someone laugh in a conversation and then take that idea and translate it to making a group of people laugh on stage, because you're having a one-way conversation, really. So it's different than, the conversation here, because a lot of people can be funny in real life. It's like, how do you transfer that? We all have senses of humor. And so, stand-up is about translating that, or whatever you're writing. If you're writing a screenplay or a novel, it's about translating it. But again, the thing I'd emphasize now to your viewers is you have to practice the craft.
Absolutely.
I think it was Malcolm Gladwell, who's written a ton of books. I can't remember what book he wrote, but he wrote a book on that very subject of, and I think he used the Beatles as an example, but you have to put in so many man hours before you actually get proficient at your craft. So whatever it is, if you're a writer, you have to write. If you want to be a film, and it's easy, man, it's easier now than any day in the history of filmmaking to get good at filmmaking. Absolutely. I wish we'd have had the technology we had now. If we had the technology now, when I was 18 or 19, if we had that same technology back then that we have now, I'd have been making films right away. I'd just been like calling a bunch of people together and shooting a feature.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Because the technology's there. So just practice it, just do it is the whole idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree more, Thor. And I think it's Jerry Seinfeld who's, kind of, proclaimed as one of the hardest working guys in television. He's got a thing called Don't Break the Chain, right? Where he's like, whatever you're doing, whether it's writing or, screenplays or videography or whatever, you do it. And then you mark an X on your calendar, and you do that every day. And when you see all those X's on the calendar, you won't want to break the chain. You'll force yourself to do what, whether it's write a page or,
right. That's
film.
Good. It's great advice.
Yeah. And you're spot on. You have natural gifts and talents that God has given you, but that doesn't mean that they're perfect, right? You've got to hone
they have to be developed.
Skills. Yeah, absolutely.
I learned that, I really have a renewed respect for actors after doing, church people. Now I'd done Christopher and I had done, Christopher Sean Shaw, the director of Church People, and I have done, well, almost for a decade now, we've done a bunch of short films, these 10-minute films. And so we got experience filmmaking, because in these short films, we ended up having the same crew that you'd have for a feature length movie, except you're only shooting 3 days. You're not shooting 21 days or 30 days or something like that. But so we were learning the craft of filmmaking, but boy, the acting was different, you know, because like Michael Monks, who played Pastor Skip in the movie, is an acting coach. So he was my acting coach during the filming. And I have a really renewed respect for actors. Well, I think some of it was because there was some drama in Church People, which, you know, my new rule is there's no crying in comedy. So just get that out of there. Anyway, but that's another story. We had to fight to keep it a comedy, believe it or not.
Well, it's a pretty serious topic. You know, the core of the movie is a pretty serious one, and very topical and very timely. Yeah. And so tell us a little bit about what led you to write. I know you wrote the script several years ago, right? So what led you?
So I probably started the script about between 2009, 2011, somewhere in there. But I'd written, you know, some other screenplays that were just general market comedies. And I was writing a particular comedy about the Christian subculture. You know, because I was a Christian, so you write what you know, and I was immersed in the Christian subculture, and I was doing these big, gigantic youth events. I mean, we did an event in Nashville. We literally had over 10,000 youth workers at this event. Wow! So these were, I mean, and back in the day when these events were like nationally known events, I mean, there was, you know, 3,000 to 5,000 people showing up at these events. So these were huge events, and they were a lot of fun to do, and you met all kinds of people, but again, it's a certain subculture that you're really immersing yourself into there. So you really get to know that subculture. And then I did some tours with some people, you know, and bus tours, and there's a whole aspect to that kind of culture. So I started on the script just about a youth pastor in crisis. And the inspiration for it really was Jon Favreau, who a lot of people may know from, he created The Mandalorian for the Disney Channel, and he directs and writes a bunch of those episodes. And he also directed some of the Iron Man movies. He played Happy in that universe. Right. But he was an actor initially, who's also a director and writer. But back in about 2000, I'd have to look it up, but about 2009, 2010, I think this might have been his first directorial this might have been his directorial debut, but he wrote and directed a film called Swingers, which is about a guy whose girlfriend dumps him, and his buddy's trying to help him get over it. So it's really a buddy movie, but it was low budget. It was only $200,000, and so I was really monitoring low budget movies that did well at the box office, because I think it made $4 million at the box office, and it was a really well done film, and so that kind of the tone of that film, and it was comedic in nature. So the tone of that film kind of became my model for writing, which at the time was called Youth Group. Right. So it was a story about a youth pastor in crisis. And so this is back in the day. I had a career I really cared about. And so I had a manager, and my manager got me a meeting with Sony Affirm. And there's a guy, I think he's still there, Josh Nadler. He's a guy over there, a really good guy. And, you know, had a meeting with them, and my whole idea at the time was I had these two high concept romantic comedies that were finished, but they were just general market comedies. But I really thought, I still think they're good ideas. So I still plan on selling them one day. But the point is this, you know, and the night before I took some friends out to dinner, and I'm like, I want to try my 2-minute pitches on you guys. I'm preparing for a meeting tomorrow, and I give them my 2-minute pitch. And I went into this meeting thinking I was completely prepared, and I give them my 2-minute pitches on these, and they're like, what's Sony Affirm? We're faith-based. Do you have a faith-based script? Did you prepare for this meeting at all? So I'm like, well, I've got this idea about a youth pastor in crisis. And they go, we want to see that. And so I'm like, well, give me a week, because I only had 30 pages of it. Right. So I took that week, and I finished the script, and I sent it off to Josh, and he called me up and gave me notes on the script. And
That's
so, but he
nice.
did this 5 times. So the guy did this 5 times. I'd do a rewrite, send it to him. He'd call me up and give me notes. And so the very final time, he says, what your story needs right now is a big idea to bring all the characters together. So I'm like, oh, okay, I'll look for a big idea. You'll just know it when you hear it, type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I had my antennas up for a big idea. And I was part of a church plant at that time. I wasn't the lead pastor or anything, but I was part of a church plant. But the guy who was the lead church planter calls me up and he goes, you're not going to believe what this nationally known church that we all have heard of and is very influential is doing. I won't name it right now. He goes, they're actually crucifying a human being on Good Friday. I'm like, there's no way. They go, yes, I'm looking at their social media page, right? So I check it out and it turns out it was false.
Right.
What he did was he misread their advertising because they were just doing a passion play, but they were going to make it so graphic that they had all kinds of warnings that made it sound like there was going to actually, it looked like they were going to kill somebody almost, but
right.
It was just a passion play, but it was going to be very graphic. So he misinterpreted that. But what I realized at that point is that the American Evangelical Church, not judging anyone's motives, but maybe for the best of intentions, pastors had done crazy things to attract people into church, but they'd done such crazy things that for a moment, my friend and I actually believed that an American Evangelical Church would actually crucify someone on a Good Friday. And at that point I go, there's my big idea, because that's satirical in nature.
Right.
And so we took that idea and that became kind of the central idea of the script, and everything kind of revolved around that.
That is awesome. And I can't imagine that the head of Sony, a firm, is calling everybody up, giving them notes 5 times over and over again. That's probably not normal. So sounds like God's had a hand in this from a long time ago.
Well, I think Josh is just a really good guy.
Well, I want to tease out a couple of kind of salient points there in that story, Thor, and that's that. Number one, you got ready for this pitch meeting and you had a couple of really well practiced, pitches ready to go. And you actually practiced them on people. That's a little nugget that a lot of people don't understand, that when you're in this industry, you've got to practice your pitches. You got to do it to everybody that will listen, and you got to run down the street, chasing somebody and say, hey, let me run this log line by you. See if it smacks you. Well, right.
If you tell somebody about your movie idea, I mean, even if it's longer than a 2-minute pitch, you're going, hey, even if it's with a conversation with somebody, it's like, oh, I got this idea for a movie. And you start telling them the movie, you can tell where you lose them.
Right. Exactly.
As you're telling them. So you're going, well, there's a problem with my story idea right there.
That's where I need to fix something. Yeah.
That's why it's good to tell because you're getting the reaction, you're getting feedback.
Right. Right. And you're sorting out problems on your own. You might be like, that really sounds awkward coming out of my mouth. Why do I say it that way, or whatever? Yeah. So practicing that pitch is one big point. Number 2, having something in your hip pocket for when they inevitably ask, what else you got? Right. That's always, that's in every pitch meeting. You got to have that, what else you got? Taking criticism well, right. Which is was a great Christian lesson and a great creative lesson.
It's never personal. I mean, you just got to figure this out as an artist. It's never personal. It's like, as a comedian, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who's, I probably known him longer than any other comedian. His name's Joby Sad. Joby and I go back from, I think we met my first year of comedy, and I think he'd been doing comedy about 6 months longer than I had. So we go back a long way, and we've kept in touch throughout the years. And I think we've become better friends. We were never, it's like our friendship has increased throughout the years. Mm-hmm, But the point is, what was my point? We're talking about COVID. Mm-hmm. I go, this is the best time to be a comedian for me, because I'm like, you don't have an audience. So it's like, I can do all the stuff I think is funny, and it's like, the audience doesn't dictate what I'm doing. Finally, someone's listening to me, or I can just listen to myself. But an audience, instead, they dictate what's going to be funny, because a lot of stuff you do is like, I don't think that's that funny. Mm-hmm. I don't know why you guys laugh at this. It's like, but it's never personal. It's like, so it's just that way. And as you're developing your stuff, the stuff that, the people people relate to it or whatever, and then that's the stuff you keep.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great lesson for those young creatives or people that are struggling in this area, is that you got to separate yourself from your creation. It's not, it is your baby for a certain amount of time, but then you got to kind of let it get up and walk on its own. And if it falls down, it falls down.
There's an old rule. It's kind of you got to be able to, it's kind of a morbid rule, but you got to be able to sacrifice your children.
Yeah.
The idea. There's some things that just have to, you love them, you love this scene, you love this idea, whatever it is, it's like, and sometimes you just have to put that. And it's like, I have 3 friends, we're 3 other friends, Bone, who you mentioned, held that up. So Bone Hampton, Darren Strebel, Leland Clausen, and I have all been friends for, again, over 20 years. And we connected first of the year. We've written a screenplay together. Mm-hmm. And it's a funny screenplay, and we're just honing out the final draft right now, but it's finished, but we're, honing it out right now. And, but I know eventually it's going to hurt some of these guys. We're going to have to cut some of that comedy.
Right.
Because, the thing about comedians is they want all the comedy, but film's about story. So you really got to focus on what serves the story. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the comedy, even though it's funny, doesn't serve the story. And I know, because for a couple of them, it's for the first time they've ever done a screenplay. Right. So for a couple of them, it's going to be a painful process eventually. I know.
Well, talk to me a little bit about that transition, because I think that's an interesting transition from comedy to screenwriter. That's not something that every
for me it wasn't, just because when I began, I literally began as a writer. So when I was in high school, again, I had a great English teacher. And I wanted to be a writer. Like when I was when I discovered novels, my goal when I was 17 was to become a writer someday. And even now, I've written 5 novels, and I'm just now moving out to try to get those published. Because the thing about novels is, I think the long, if you want to be a novelist when you're 17, that's great. Continue writing. Mark your X on the calendar every day. Continue writing, but realize you're not going to have any good stories to tell until you're like in your 40s.
Right, exactly.
So just prepare yourself for a long haul of. Now, that's not to say you can't, tell some interesting stories as a 17-year-old and write but here's the thing, right? They say write what you know, and I would just start keeping a journal of your daily life.
Right.
Fictionalize it if you want. Just fictionalize your daily life.
Yeah. And
then when you're 40, you can look back and you can shape that into a story. Absolutely. I wish I'd have done that. But I think a lot of times you try to write ahead of where you are. Mm-hmm. It's like, if you're 17, just write about being 17, and write about what it's like to be a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old or in college or whatever you're doing. Just write about that. And then eventually later you'll find, because you need details to hang your story on.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and you need real life. You need real life to kind of percolate through that story. You can tell.
It's the details that sell the story.
Absolutely.
So, and I always say, begin with the story. Find a story that you're passionate about. But then as you're telling that story, you have to fill it in with reality. Mm-hmm. So, that's the whole thing. But I began wanting to be a writer. And so when I began stand-up, you're writing. Now, there are different ways of writing. Some guys just develop their act on stage, so they never write anything down.
Oh, wow.
And that's a great way to do stand-up, I think, because the stand-up is about delivery, and it's a monologue. Mm-hmm. So if you're just talking and then you find the points at how you say it and where they laugh at that, it's just a matter of repeating that. But I wrote everything down. So when I started stand-up, I literally sounded like Captain Kirk doing comedy. It was like, so today I walked in, because I'm remembering the way I was delivering it exactly the way I wrote it, and my delivery was so stilted because I was thinking about what I was saying, and so I had a weird delivery. And a matter of fact, somebody even said that, it's like, you're like you're Captain Kirk doing comedy, and I'm like, wow, okay, I gotta step back and figure out a delivery here.
Or just lean into it, brother. Just lean into it.
Yeah, like I am Captain Kirk doing comedy, so that is my delivery. And I don't even do a good Captain Kirk impression. It's just the cadence was kind of like Captain Kirkish. But and that's because I wrote everything. And I even had comedians at that time tell me they wouldn't say, "Hey, you're a good comedian," but they go, "You're a good writer," which is really a way of saying, your delivery sucks, man.
Right.
But man, I like the material. So I had to grow into, performing the
Right.
stand-up. So,
Right.
and that's a craft in itself. But I was always writing, and the reason I got into stand, it was just it's like the technology was not available to make cheap films.
Right.
When I started stand-up, independent films were still 16 millimeter film, which was still expensive. You're talking about 10 grand just to make a nothing movie. And you're like, who can afford that when you're in your early 20s,
Right. And you just got a bunch of film at the end of it. You can't do anything with
that's
it.
exactly it. There was
you got to have an editor.
There was no distribution. It was anyway, but so stand-up was the lowest, the easiest rung into showbiz, really. Okay. And I felt like it was something where I could, you're in one sense you're acting, because there's this aspect to stand-up that is acting. You're performing like this just happened today, even though I just got my haircut at a beauty college today, even though it's been for 10 years I've said this line on stage. So yeah, it's like so it was, writing, performing, and all that stuff. And even as I began stand-up, my goal was to write screenplays.
Okay. All right.
And
Interesting.
so you work on, but what happens when you begin stand-up though is because it's such a craft to learn. Like you're spending a decade just learning that craft. So the screenwriting took kind of a back seat to stand-up itself as writing it did, even though I'm writing stand-up notes and stacks of notebooks of material and stuff like that. But stand-up was draining to me because, again, as a writer, I'd write these whole pieces, and because at the time I was writing bits. I'd write these long pieces, and you have to memorize them,
right? Yeah,
and then perform them. It's like, and I found like it's easy. Well, it's hard either way, and I found like if you just about 10 jokes or about 5 minutes of material.
Okay.
But you got to write 10 jokes. So I started just writing jokes, instead of these performance pieces. Their own. They were like their own little,
their own little 3-act movement.
They were like a skit. That's just what he said. Like your act is like made up of 3 skits.
Right.
Really.
Right.
So, but I found it was, and I was lazy because it was probably and the other thing I was inexperienced because I didn't realize. You deliver this whole 5-minute skit and you only get 3 laughs at it. And you're like, I guess I got to toss that. You're like, take the 3 laughs, cut everything else out. Take the 3 laughs. Like, oh man, I wasn't smart enough, lazy and dumb. But eventually, yeah. So that moved me into, stand up as a career full time. And then eventually went back to, writing. In terms of started writing screenplays then.
Yeah. So again, it's over and over. It's repetition. It's hard work. So many people kind of get this concept in their brain that, showbiz is just, the rocket ship to Easy Street. And it's not. It's just as hard as being a construction worker or a programmer.
It's hard work that you love. And that's whatever you do, you should love what you do. I would hope in America you have that opportunity. By God's grace, we can love what we do and work hard at it. And so that Christopher and I have always had a motto almost from day one when we shot Skip Listening, which I actually have a feature script for now, but
yeah, he mentioned that yesterday. I'm pretty excited about that.
So,
that sounds cool.
But with the motto, because when you bring a bunch of creatives together, they can get tense because every creative thinks their idea is the best and their way is the best. That's part of being a creative person. And so you bring a bunch of creatives together and it can get tense on set. But Kristen and I developed this motto where when we felt things getting tense, one of us would yell out, "Fun!" Because we're making a movie. This is like what people dream of doing. If you can't enjoy doing it, get out of the business because you're making it miserable for others. And this should be fun. This is like going to camp for adults. I mean, yes. Do kids play hard at camp? Do they wear themselves out? Yes. And they love it. Yes. That's what filmmaking is. It's fun.
Absolutely.
So if you have this tense set, it's like something's wrong.
Right.
Somebody somewhere is wrong. It's fun. And you need to enjoy the process. So,
I love it. That's a great nugget. So tell me a little bit about, so you're a comedy writer, right? Dyed in the wool, a stand-up comedian, but you write this script for this movie. It was originally youth group, now it's church people, with a pretty serious heart, right? It's this, message of,
Well,
is the gospel enough? Was
that's the thing. Now, this is my advice to Christian creatives who want to do screenplays. Never begin with, what do I want to say? Begin with a story. Now, if you have a passionate subject and you want to say something about it, look for a story that deals with that subject, but start with the story. Start with a story that goes, that's really interesting. That's interesting to me. I found and I'm, this was the movie's satirical in nature, which Christians struggle with satire though.
Very true.
Because satire is, you're saying the opposite of what you mean, and Christians are, we're people of the truth. Say what you mean. Right. So satire is like almost a dichotomy for Christians sometimes. So we struggle with satire a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then we're living in satirical times. So satire is hard for people to recognize when you're living in a satire. You don't actually recognize the craziness that you're living in. And some of that is the Christian subculture. And I think that the other thing is, people think because it's a comedy, you're not taking the subject matter seriously. And that's not true at all. You can, comedy can say a lot dealing with just because it's a comedy doesn't mean we don't take the gospel seriously. And I think sometimes people misinterpret that. I've had people to say, every now and then I still get it. Sometimes people say, Christian comedian, isn't that an oxymoron? As if a Christian can't say something funny, as if there's something they literally said that they don't associate being funny with being a Christian. I'm like, that just shows their worldview is very, very flat, or something. There's something not wholly biblical about their worldview.
Yeah.
If God's the God of all creation, did he not create humor?
Sure he did.
Did Satan create humor? No, he didn't. So, why should the devil have all the good comedy? So,
that's right.
But I had a point in there somewhere.
You were talking about, you want to start with the story and then
start with the story. That's it.
Yeah.
Start with the story and then work on the story. And when the story is engaging, now depending, like our subject matter, like the story was dealing with the gospel itself. Like, do we need bells and whistles to make the gospel so-called relevant?
Right.
And that's a lot. It's really dealing with the church growth movement. It's really dealing with the methodology of the church, which is a serious issue. But some of our methodology is so flawed that it is satirical.
Yes.
Because
absolutely.
everything, most everything in that film, we didn't have to make up, unfortunately.
Oh my goodness.
I knew a church planter. It became a thing. I'll get the church logo tattooed on my arm if we hit certain numbers. It's like, that's a thing.
Right.
The whole this is almost, here's the times we're so this past Easter, which we just had last week,
right.
There was a local church where I live. They advertised this Easter BMX show. So that's what we had in the movie. We had the bikes jumping, off a ramp over the pastor's head. Right. Now, what was originally in the script was those were motorcycles.
Okay.
Because some pastor actually did that. He actually had the motorcycles drive down the aisles of the sanctuary up on a platform up on the stage and
no way
over his head during a sermon for a sermon illustration. Pastors wearing Superman costumes. They're doing all these, like, I didn't make any of that up. I'm just reporting at this point.
Oh my goodness.
and that's here's what happened. So you're putting all that in there to make a point, which is, sometimes in trying to reach people, we actually make the gospel silly in the way we try to reach. Our methodology matters. It really does.
Well, we minimize the message of the gospel, right? Because
somehow the power of the message itself is not enough, we think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We minimize that with all of this extra and all of this insanity, and
so that's the serious point of the movie is. Yeah. And it was screened to several megachurch pastors, and they didn't. The comment that they was like, I feel like he's talking about us. So I'm not against megachurches. I'm not against mega churches. I'm not against big churches, but there's a definite problem in the church at large with our mentality. Because
Absolutely.
now I'm rounding out these numbers, but there are about 400,000 churches in America. Out of those 400,000 churches, and they're not all Bible believing churches, of course, but out of the 400,000 churches in America, only 1,000 are mega churches. So the average church in America is about 50 people.
Right.
Now you can have 50 to 100 to 200 to 300, but the average church is 50 people. So that's normal. That's what a normal church looks like. But what dominates our mentality in the evangelical church is the minority viewpoint of these mega churches. They dominate our viewpoint, and it is damaging to the body of Christ. It's damaging to how we live our lives as Christians. And the methodology, I think, is also damaging. So they're important issues. And again, I'm not against big churches,
Right.
but again,
well,
I'm against some of the methodology.
Yeah, I think anytime you take the minority view and you view it as the majority, you're going to have skewing, right? I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. You can't avoid it. So, I mean, I think that's dangerous regardless of the subject matter, but it's really critically dangerous when we're talking about the church and the gospel and robbing the gospel of the power of the message that it is. It's just, hey, we don't need anything other than the crucifixion. And oh, by the way, if you add anything to the crucifixion of Jesus, it's no longer it's no longer the gospel, right?
It becomes a different message.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, so in terms of just if you were speaking to the 17-year-old Thor Ramsey out there, if you could, speak through a time capsule back at your younger self, what would be some advice that you would give the younger Thor? And by extension, some of our listeners out there, some of these creatives out there who are just starting on their journey.
Wow. Well, one of the things I would say is I'm trying to figure out how to word this or how to express the sentiment, but don't be afraid of rejection.
Amen.
Don't be afraid of what you think is like a good idea or what you think is funny. Stick to that. Don't drop it right away. Again, the audience does shape, what we're doing, but there's an aspect to, you can't write, because people make this mistake. I'll write what I think people want.
Right.
And that's the way to write something no one wants. And I think Christian films are really, again, I'm a defender of the Christian subculture now. I think Christian films have really improved in the last decade. But there is I saw this early on. I don't see it as much anymore, but you used to see this in Christian music a lot. It was horrific. I thought it was horrific because it's completely unoriginal, but there'd be a secular hit. Now let's do the Christian version.
Right.
You can do the same thing with the movie. There's a movie, it's this, and let's make the Christian version of that. It's like whatever it's called. You can pick any movie. Name a movie. What's your favorite movie?
We'll say Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, well, we couldn't do that as Christians. We don't have that budget. So we don't have the budget for that. But but you got the fantasy thing, and but Lord of the Rings in one sense was written, it's Tolkien, so it's too Christian already. It's Christian enough.
Sure.
The symbolism and everything.
We'll go crazy. We'll say Die Hard.
Yeah, so Die Hard. You can take Die Hard, and you're like, let's do Die Hard as a Christian. So you got so you just do the Die Hard version of, it's like he died for you hard. That whatever. You're gonna tweak the title, and so it's just becomes, but it becomes, it's paint by numbers in art, and paint by numbers is you never see a paint by numbers painting going, that's brilliant.
Right. Exactly.
Like, this is, wow. Your dad did this in his spare time because he's a mechanic, right? My dad used to like paint by number paintings. He enjoyed it, so he did that. That's fine. You can do. It's a hobby, but it's not the kind of art you want people to pay for.
Right. Exactly.
So my point is, like I would say this to myself as a stand-up back then. Push through more. When you have a concept, push through. Don't be afraid of the silence from the audience. you're going to have to push through the place where you're almost immune to their rejection so you can get to something original. And that's what it takes. And I don't think most of us, I don't think most of us have the emotional, psychological, spiritual wherewithal to get to that place of originality.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us, we do our art because we want to be appreciated and loved for it.
Right.
There's something that drives us, there's something about the artist that, wants to be appreciated, but that's biblical. God created the heavens and the earth, and then he, it was like almost this idea that he stepped back and, looked at it and it's good and enjoyed his own creation. And artists do that all the time. That feeling when you create something, I do this all the time. If somebody says, "Hey, I watched your movie," or "I'm going to see your movie," I'm like, "Okay, I need to go back and take a look at that and see what." And I kind of imagine what they're thinking at a certain point. I'm revisiting it through their eyes in one sense. And so artists do this all the time. Creatives do this all the time. So I would just say, push through that initial rejection, especially in performance art things. Because you got to get there to get something original. And I think that's what it's hard to do in Christian, because Christian film is a genre. Mm-hmm. I tell people Christian, and I'm for it now, because before I was not a big advocate of the Christian subculture, but I am now, because especially the way culture is now. I don't believe that for creatives who are in front of the camera or who have, for the writers and actors and directors, there's not really a place in Hollywood for you, in my opinion. If you're an outspoken Christian. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're behind the cameras and you're a cameraman or a gaffer or something like that, yes, because you're contributing to the process. The question is, do you like what you're contributing to in the Hollywood? Because Hollywood has a worldview that dominates. It's far left. Yep. And it is anti-Christian. Mm-hmm. Now I think you have that tier dominates Hollywood. They want to push a certain agenda. They do push an agenda, and they push it in a propagandist type way. Right. And then you have a tier where people, they just want to do their craft. They're not really political ideal, but they do their craft. But they shut up because they know who dominates. So they shut up about it. Right. So you got that going on. But and then you got tier 3, where it's like people with a different point of view that can be outspoken, but eventually they are going to be, it's the McCarthy era again. They're going to be blackballed. They're blacklisted. They're not going to work. We can give real life examples. This is not, this is not conjecture anymore. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is reality.
Happening right now. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that being said, that's why a Christian subculture in terms of film is necessary, because we're in the world. We're not of the world. That's why we have different types of films. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, Christian films have been, criticized for years. You guys just make such bad films. It's like, well, you know what? The secular market makes more. You guys make more bad films because there's more of you. You have more money. You make more bad films. Do you make more good films? Yes, but there's more of you. Right. You have more money and more, talent to choose from. You know what a big budget in the Christian realm is? Like $2,000. That's a big budget.
Exactly.
In the secular market, $5 million, or I meant $2 million. Right. $2 million is a big budget, but $5 million, that's the low end of a low budget film in the secular market. We don't even come close to their low end.
Oh, I know. And some of them won't even.
High end doesn't come close to their low end.
Yeah, some of them won't even talk to you unless you have a $10 million budget out the gate. They're like,
that's exactly it. But now, are films getting better? I think they are getting better. I think our crafts are getting better. The production values are getting better. Now, what we have to really work on is our stories. Because Christian films are a genre, and in a genre, you have to hit certain points that the audience is expecting. Right. And in a Christian film, you have to have, there has to be a biblical Christian message in it. Now, it doesn't have to be a message movie per se, but the characters have to be they have to represent the evangelical Christian. So and they have to be free of language, bad language, that type of thing. And I know some Christian artists like, if you want to start inserting everything the world has in their movies, then just go make movies over there. Exactly. You don't want to make Christian. It's a genre. Exactly. You're not going to meet the genre character. People have an agreement. They want their 8-year-old kid to be able to sit and watch whatever movie it is. I don't care what your movie subject matter is. They want their 8-year-old to be able to sit there with them. If you're going to make Die Hard for the Christian market, an 8-year-old's got to be able to watch that Die Hard movie. Exactly. So that's the agreement you're making with the audience. Now, if you don't want to make those movies, then you don't want to make Christian movies. That's what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Go make secular movies. Go make movies in the general market. And good luck with being an outspoken Christian.
Right. Because they're going to quash you.
Yeah. And be the son. And that's why, I have Christian filmmaking friends who say, well, why can't we just, if I ask people who want to make Christian films, what are your favorite films? They'll mention things like Up and like, but those aren't Christian films.
Right.
They might have common grace values, because you can't make a film without some sort of Christian values, because God created all things.
That's right.
So, there's an idea that everyone's morality that has any semblance of sanity is going to represent Christian morality, because God has written his laws upon every human being's heart. So even the unbeliever is going to understand the hero's journey, so to speak, or a redemptive theme. That's why there's movies that appeal to a broad range of people. Sure, fantastic. But we're talking about Christian genre films. That's a different category. We're not making Up. If we make Up, you know what? Those two cartoon characters they're going to be Christians in some way. That's the whole thing, So there's going to be an aspect where there's going to be a Christian element in there.
Absolutely.
And again, and I'm not talking about just stamping Bible verses on things, but I'm saying it's a genre expectation. If you're writing a murder mystery, you know what? Someone's got to be killed in the beginning. That's just, you can't write a murder mystery unless you have a dead body.
That's right.
Now, write it creatively. Do whatever you want creatively, but you got to have a dead body. You got to have an investigator. You have to have a villain. And there's other things in that genre that the audience expects. And when they're not met, you know what the audience says? I don't know what it was about that movie that just didn't.
It just wasn't very good.
It just didn't hit with them because they were expecting certain, things to happen. So that's just the reality of Christian filmmaking.
And I think there's a huge onus as well, and what you're saying, Thor, is exactly correct. But I think there's a big onus as well on the Christian consumer. One of the big problems that we face in the Christian film market, the film industry rather, is that we do have to deal with these reduced production budgets. But because we have those reduced production budgets, the reason for that is because Christians aren't out there putting their dollars behind these movies. If the studios saw that people were actually buying these movies and they were able to get their money back on the back end, then budgets would go up and you'd be able to have better.
Well, if you look at the Kendrick Brothers movies, I mean, their movies have made money.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The Kendrick Brothers, all their movies have made money. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure in the current cultural climate we live in that money even speaks to Hollywood. They've got enough money. They don't need our money. So they don't. I mean, even when the Kendrick Brothers movies did well and broke the top 10 in the box office, Hollywood never came knocking to their. Well, as far as I know, I've never talked to them. So.
Yeah, I was talking about Christian producers. So, them saying, hey, we'll get off the dime because, we know this is going to be, a hit in the box office.
Movies are a risky venture. You never know. And I was talking to somebody yesterday going, just like, don't try to write the crossover film. I think as our films get better, I think there'll be a Christian genre film that'll cross over, but it won't cross over because they intended it to cross over.
Right.
It'll cross over because all of a sudden people just like it. That story hit. And there's no formula to that. If there's a formula, we'd all do it. That's the whole thing.
Every movie would be a crossover.
That's exactly. Every movie would be a crossover. That's exactly it. But again, is that your goal, to be a crossover artist? I think that's just be an artist. Do what you're called to do and do it to the glory of God. And
amen.
A man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. It's that whole thing.
That's right.
Make your decisions, write your script, and just got to leave it in the Lord's hands.
That's right. Absolutely. At my company, at Brannon Pixel, we've got a saying that's don't get ahead of God. So it's just all about following in his footsteps, whatever he's going to lead you into. Well, Thor, definitely tell our listeners and our watchers out there, again, where they can find out more about Church People, where they can watch it. Social media links.
Churchpeoplefilm.com. So go to churchpeoplefilm.com. That's the best site to go to.
And there they can watch the film for a certain amount of time. They can order it, I guess, on online.
Well, it's got the links there. You can go to Salem Now And Salem
Okay.
Now, right now, you can either rent it or you can buy it through Salem Now for people familiar with that. There are churches showing it around the country right now.
Excellent.
I think for the last month, I think it was last month. Well, I know it was about a month that churches were showing it around the country. I still think that's going on for about another week or two.
Okay.
But it'll just let you know when we roll it out through other media platforms like, ITV or Prime, iMovie or
Awesome.
stuff like that.
Awesome. Well, again, Thor, thank you so much for being on today. I'd love to pray for us as we kind of close out the show here.
All right, man.
All right, so let's go before the Father. Hi, King of Heaven, we just come before you today, praising your name and making much about you, Father. We thank you so much for this technology, which enables us to talk across the country or across the world. We thank you for living in a country, Father, where we can still openly, without fear of persecution, talk about you and speak your name and talk about your gospel. Father, I thank you so much for the opportunity to get to know Thor a little bit today. I pray your blessings upon him and upon his family, upon all the endeavors that he puts his hand to, Father. I know that just from this short conversation that he has a heart for you and a love for your scripture. And I just pray, Father, your blessings upon the things that are before him in terms of his work and his projects. I just pray that you will bless all the things that he is doing for you and for your kingdom. I pray a blessing over church people, Father, this entire movie, all of the people that are watching it. I pray that they hear the truth of the gospel presented, that they know that the gospel doesn't need anything else but what you've already hard baked into it, Father. And I praise you for that. I praise you for your grace and for your mercy. I just thank you so much again, Father, for this opportunity. And I just ask if there's anything that we can do to help Thor and to help church people, that you will place it before us and have your Holy Spirit goad us into making that happen. We just be careful, Father, to give you the praise and the glory for all that happens. In your Son's name we ask it all. Amen.
Amen. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you, Thor. And to everybody out there watching and listening, thank you for tuning in. Be sure and share this and spread the word about what Thor's doing with church people, and be looking out for his next projects. So we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode today. To find all the links and the resources that were mentioned as a part of the show, head over to our website and check out our page at theophanymedia.com/Thor. Creatively Christian is a product of Theophany Media. You can find out more at theophanymedia.com. This show is hosted by Brannon Hollingsworth, Andrea Sandifer, Bill Brooks, and Lynn Baber. Our logo is by Bill Brooks. Our music is by Bill Brooks and Andrea Sandifer. And remember, if you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to rate, review, and share wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a blessed day and keep on creating for our Lord.